sister told the officers as they cuffed me for her crime. My parents stood right behind her, nodding in disgust as if I were a monster. For 20 years, the golden child lied, and they believed every single word. They thought they had finally destroyed me, framing me for an $89,000 grand theft that my sister committed to cover her secret debts. But as the detectives pushed me into that sterile interrogation room, I didn't shout or cry. I just looked at the investigators and asked them to open the battered manila folder I'd been quietly keeping since I was 12 years old. Before we reveal the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. Trust me, what happens next will leave you completely speechless. My name is Stella, and I am 32 years old. I spent my entire life as the designated scapegoat under the heavy, suffocating shadow of my family's toxic dynamics. On the other side of that dynamic was my younger sister, Maya, the flawless, untouchable golden child. In our household, Maya could do no wrong. She was constantly praised, deeply pampered, and fiercely shielded from any form of real-world consequences by our parents. Meanwhile, I was the human sponge meant to absorb every ounce of their frustration. I was blamed for every broken dish, every missed utility bill, and every single family argument, even when I wasn't even in the room. When I turned 12, the breaking point finally arrived. I was wrongfully accused of stealing my mother's expensive diamond bracelet. I cried, begged, and pleaded my innocence, but they chose to believe Maya's smug, fabricated whispers instead. That was the exact day I realized nobody was ever going to protect me. I had to protect myself. I bought a cheap, plastic manila folder and hid it beneath a loose floorboard in my bedroom. From that moment on, I began secretly saving everything, every store receipt that proved my whereabouts, diary entries with dates, and eventually, hidden voice recordings. It became my lifelong insurance policy, a quiet documentation of the absolute truth, waiting for the day they would try to completely destroy me. Fast forward to the present day. My parents had spent decades operating a successful, family-owned logistics business, a company they always promised would secure our future, though they clearly meant Maya's future. Because of my sharp attention to detail, I was the one tasked with handling the digital filing and administrative backend, working quietly in the background while Maya occupied a flashy, public-facing executive role. Everything seemed stable until a routine internal audit suddenly revealed a catastrophic anomaly. Exactly $89,000 had vanished from the core business operating accounts without a single trace. Instead of launching a thorough investigation or hiring an independent forensic accountant, my parents instantly turned their suspicious eyes toward me. To them, it was the perfect, convenient narrative, the flawed eldest daughter finally showing her true, twisted colors. Maya immediately weaponized the situation, feigning dramatic tears in front of our parents. She claimed she had walked past my office late at night and saw me logged directly into the secure corporate banking portal, transferring funds. Driven by an absolute, blind loyalty to their precious golden child, my parents refused to listen to a single word of my explanation. They didn't want to look at the logs I tried to show them, and they completely denied me the chance to defend myself. They immediately picked up the phone and contacted the local authorities, declaring they were finally going to teach me a lesson I would never forget by throwing me behind bars. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers cut through the evening shadows of our driveway, signaling the trap had officially sprung. When the heavy front door swung open, the nightmare materialized. Two local police officers stood in our entryway, their expressions grim and unyielding as they informed me that a formal complaint for grand theft had been filed against me. I didn't flinch, nor did I lower my gaze. I stood perfectly still as the metal cuffs clicked tightly around my wrists, the cold steel biting into my skin. Behind the officers stood the true authors of my misery. Maya was positioned perfectly in the background, her face a masterful mask of manufactured sorrow, though her eyes danced with the malicious satisfaction of a predator that had finally cornered its prey. My parents stood flanking her like a protective shield, their faces hardened with a mixture of disgust and self-righteous anger. They didn't offer a single word of comfort. Instead, They eagerly handed over a packet of completely fabricated corporate digital evidence to the arresting officers. They were entirely prepared to sacrifice my life and send me to a state penitentiary, all to preserve the spotless reputation of their precious golden child. As the officers guided me out toward the waiting patrol car, my family watched from the porch, convinced they had won. But inside, I felt an eerie, unshakable calm, because tucked safely into my lawyer's briefcase was the physical manifestation of my 20-year insurance policy. The heavy steel door clicked shut behind me, sealing me inside the sterile, windowless interrogation room. Across the metal table sat two seasoned detectives, their expressions unreadable as they spread out a series of printed bank statements. They confidently pointed to a trail of complex digital transactions, all showing that the missing $89,000 had been routed directly into an online account registered entirely under my name. They looked at me as if the case were already closed, waiting for the inevitable tears or a panicked confession. But I just sat there breathing calmly and met their gaze. "I didn't steal that money," I said, my voice steady and clear. "And if you want the real thief, you need to look at what's inside this folder." On my command, my attorney, who had just entered the room, placed the battered, expanding manila folder onto the table. This was the collection I had started when I was just 12 years old, now filled to the brim with decades of undeniable proof. I asked the detectives to open it and look at the most recent printouts. Inside were detailed IP tracking logs, device registry signatures, and digital forensic reports compiled by an independent cybersecurity expert I had secretly hired weeks ago. The documents proved a flawless, undeniable reality. Maya had secretly cloned my digital access tokens and corporate credentials years ago. She had been routing the stolen funds through an account she created using my stolen identity, executing every single fraudulent transaction from her own personal laptop and smartphone while I was completely sound asleep. The detectives leaned forward, their skepticism melting away as they flipped through the dense layers of evidence. The folder didn't just clear my name, it exposed the dark reality of Maya's hidden lifestyle. The financial tracking sheets and bank records proved exactly where that $89,000 had gone. It hadn't funded my life. Instead, every single dollar had been rapidly funneled directly into high-interest offshore accounts, luxury retail spending sprees, and covering up a massive, failed real estate scam that Maya had been running completely behind our parents' backs. As the investigators dug deeper into the older documents, the lifelong pattern of behavior became impossible to deny. I showed them meticulously categorized evidence dating all the way back to our high school days. There were saved text messages, bank deposits, and journaled timelines proving that every single crisis I had ever been blamed for was actually engineered by Maya. She had spent 20 years systematically fabricating mistakes, framing me, and draining our parents' bank accounts to fund her own reckless behavior while I took the fall. The entire atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The detectives looked up from the folder, their expressions hardened, realizing they had been completely weaponized by a toxic family of fraudsters. The focus of the entire investigation turned on a dime. I was no longer the suspect. The state was now actively preparing to pivot the full weight of the law toward arresting Maya for her crimes, while building a secondary case against our parents for corporate negligence, embezzlement, and filing a false police report. The atmosphere inside the district attorney's private conference room was thick with anticipation. My parents and Maya arrived alongside their flashy corporate lawyer, their heads held high, fully believing they were walking in to sign my formal plea deal and finalize my ruin. Maya even wore a smug, victorious smile as she smoothed down her designer jacket. But the second we all sat down, the district attorney didn't slide over a confession for me to sign. Instead, he pushed forward a thick stack of arrest warrants and the irrefutable digital evidence straight from my manila folder. I sat back quietly and watched as the family's defense attorney picked up the documents. Within seconds, the absolute color drained entirely from his face, and he went completely pale. He leaned over, urgently whispering to my parents that the digital footprints, IP logs, and identity theft records were completely airtight. The realization hit them like a physical blow. The trap they had meticulously set for me had snapped shut on themselves. Right there in that room, the grand illusion of the perfect golden child completely collapsed. Maya burst into a chaotic, hysterical fit of tears, turning on our parents and loudly blaming them for the high-pressure expectations that drove her to steal. But her tears couldn't save her anymore. The officers stepped forward, and Maya was arrested on the spot for grand larceny, bank fraud, and aggravated identity theft. My parents were left frozen in absolute horror, facing severe legal penalties, massive compliance audits, and immediate financial ruin for corporate negligence, and lying directly to law enforcement. 3 months after that fateful day, I packed up my entire life and walked away from my biological family forever, completely vindicated, legally cleared, and entirely free. I used my meticulous data tracking skills and newfound financial freedom to establish my own thriving digital security consulting firm, helping other corporate businesses safeguard themselves against internal fraud and digital identity theft. The heavy burden of being the family's scapegoat was finally lifted from my shoulders, replaced by a deep, unshakable sense of peace. It is truly remarkable how a 12-year-old girl's desperate survival instinct ended up saving a 32-year-old woman's entire future. My parents and sister made their choices, and they are finally living with the catastrophic legal and financial consequences of their own greed. If you discovered your own family was quietly plotting against you, would you have the patience to wait 20 years to expose them? Don't forget to watch the 2 videos on your screen right now for more shocking stories. Thank you for watching until the